All right. Welcome back to another episode of the 50 Fierce and Fit podcast. Today we have Bridget with us, and I will let you introduce yourself. So why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. We've had some great conversations so far, so I'm so happy to be here with you. My name is Bridget Truxillo. I'm an attorney. I have a law firm called the Lady Law Shield, but I'm also a former deputy sheriff where I was in patrol. I did undercover narcotics for most of it, and also I was on a SWAT team. I was the only female member they had on the SWAT team. Um, and part of my story that I share often is the reason why I have my law firm is because I left law enforcement because of being on SWAT team, and but I'm not. I don't, I'm happy about that because now I can help in a very specific way. But yeah, that's me.
Very cool. I love that you are able to help women or other. I guess why don't you speak to that a little bit? What's like your target demographic, and how do you help them out?
I would say all law enforcement, but certainly I can help all first responders because I think it's a culture that if you haven't worked in it, you just don't get it. And don't no disrespect to anybody out there who hasn't worked in it, but it's just something unless you've lived it, it's a very unique experience. And so certainly law enforcement, but all first responders, if you deal with a job that puts you under extreme amounts of stress, the amounts of things, the harshness of the things you see every day. And then I do not only, 50% of my clients, or maybe, I don't really know the split of it right now, are men and women. I help with employment related matters. So problems that you're facing at work, harassment, discrimination, retaliation, you've been demoted for some crazy, stupid reason. But yeah, and we can dig into some examples of that. But I also help with officers who've been placed on a Brady Giglio list. Um, Maybe you're familiar with it, but to say it succinctly is that if a prosecutor or a district attorney, for whatever some reason, thinks that you're a liar, an untruthful cop, they're supposed to turn that information over to the defense. And I agree with the foundations of that, but unfortunately, too many district attorneys and prosecutors put officers on this list for things that are not untruthful. And sadly, once you get on that list, it's really hard to get off because there's no rules telling them that they don't have to notify you that you're on it. They don't have you don't get it to appeal it. You don't get to fight back. There's no avenue for you to try and get your name off. Usually you end up losing your job if you get on that list. But I help officers come up with a plan to try and get their name off that list. So basically what I say is if you're facing a problem at work and you're a law enforcement officer, you're a first responder, I can probably help you figure out how to fight back or how to try and fix it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't even think about like the whole Brady Giglio thing because that's honestly not something that I've personally run into much. But maybe that's just my lack of experience there. And you're based in the Houston area, correct?
I live in Houston. I'm licensed to practice law in 4 states, and I've taken 4 different state bar exams, which I hope to never, ever, ever, ever do again. Um, Texas, Florida, New York, and Louisiana. Um, but I help officers and first responders nationwide because pretty much everything I just described is based upon a federal statute, federal case law. If you're facing harassment, discrimination, retaliation, if that's happening to you, that's a federal civil rights violation. And so I have clients from Washington to Virginia, Minnesota to I think I have somebody in Arizona. I can't remember. Um, it really kind of all depends on the union framework where in the state in which you live. But even if you're in a union, uh, for the most part, your union won't help you on employment related matters, with the exception of somewhere like the Northeast, where the unions up there are much different. Um, but even here in Texas, where I am, some of the biggest unions in the state, or in Houston specifically, there are some really large unions, and I think it's great everybody should be in it. If for no other reason, then you should have the legal defense fund available to you if you get into a use of force litigation issue. But even one of the biggest unions here in Houston, if they have somebody call them with an employment related matter, they refer that out to me because they don't get involved in that kind of stuff. It's nationwide. And sadly, people call me from across the country, but thankfully, I'm able to help people across the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. That it's mostly a lot of it's a federal thing, so you can help all over. I love
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So, at what point in your career, because this is interesting to me, small backstory, when I went to college, I originally thought I was going to go through law school.
Hmm.
And I actually got part of the way into the program, and I realized, like, I guess it turned me away because I realized like how mundane some processes can be. It's like repetitive over and over again. So I guess that kind of turned me off from law school, but I never like completely took it off the plate and went and got my master's in criminal justice and all of that. So my question is, how did you come to getting the law degree, or like what did your career look like going through the law enforcement side and then going into law?
So I'm going to date myself here because probably a lot older than you. But when I was in high school, that movie with Tom Cruise, The Firm, was a huge hit. So I went into college thinking, oh, I'll just go be a tax attorney. That looks cool because surely they all just run off to the Caymans and fight tax crime in the Caymans, which, yeah, no, that's not how it happens. And then somehow, in the beginning of college, I went to the University of Florida. I'm from Louisiana, mostly originally. I'm kind of from the South in general. But high school in Louisiana, I went to University of Florida for college. When I got there, I realized, well, tax sounds really boring, and didn't had no idea what I wanted to do really, but also knew I just never really envisioned myself being like an office person. Um, I just kind of knew it'd be something active, maybe outside. Still had no idea. Ended up going into engineering. Also had no idea what that meant. But I chose agricultural and biological engineering, thinking, okay, well, that's still outside. And I hated it. In my fourth year of college, I withdrew from school. My dad didn't talk to me for a year about, but my dad and I are very close, so we got past it. But worked two jobs, went to New Zealand for about a month by myself. Hence why my dad didn't talk to me for a month. I mean, a year. Because back then, also dating myself, there were no cell phones to check in anytime you wanted to. I had to call home collect. And I'm sure most people don't even know what that means. But that's what I did. And came back and got the stupid degree in another twist in environmental horticulture because they accepted all of my maths and sciences from engineering, and I just wanted to get out. And I thought, okay, it's still plants, it's outside, it'll be fine. But then I came, graduating. I'm like, well, I don't want to grow plants for the rest of my life. So decided that I wanted to do something that had to do with, again, fitness, being active. And I just decided, stumbled upon like law enforcement, but I was more on eyeing like federal law enforcement. In order to get there, I joined local law enforcement, and which is also crazy. Nobody in my family's ever been in law enforcement before in any way. So they certainly all thought I was nuts. But that's been a common pattern in my decades of life. And I don't care. So wanted a job that required me to be fit because at the time I still was active and exercised, and but just didn't know in my early 20s if I, is that something I would be able to maintain on my own, or should I have something to help motivate me as I get older? Now I'm 48 and I can say like I can do this on my own. I don't need it to be my job, because also I became a cop and realized you don't have to be fit to be a cop, sadly. And also, once I got into law enforcement, it's also why I started went in my narcotics route, because I thought that would look good on my resume if I wanted to do FBI, DEA, something like that. And then SWAT team is like, of course you have to be fit to be on SWAT team. But then the law school thing still was never really on my mind, even though I went into college thinking, oh, I'll be a tax attorney. But then when it all came crumbling down, meaning I thought I was going to be in law enforcement for the rest of my professional life, and then deciding, to leave, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Had no idea what I wanted to do. And then ultimately just landed on, well, I'll go to law school because I don't know what else to do. I don't really know what kind of lawyer I want to be. But it can't be a bad thing to have a law degree. And so, yeah, at 30 years old, I started law school. And I'm a firm believer, and always have been, like, it's never too late. It's never too late to start, recreate, start over, whatever. I'm willing to work hard to, obviously I continually keep doing it to myself. I could be working a cush job in a law firm, making a decent salary, great salary, and not having to worry about running a business. But nope, it's not the route that I choose for myself. And I love the route that I've chosen. But so getting to law school was certainly not necessarily an intentional choice. And I'm so grateful. I don't say grateful for myself, I guess I could say, but I don't regret any of the hard parts that have led me here, because I truly believe I'm doing what I'm supposed to do now in the way that I do it as a lawyer, because I can help in a way that I know it's needed, because I needed it so badly when I was in law enforcement. And the help that I'm providing, I couldn't find that when I was in law enforcement. And I created my law firm specifically to help the person that I was back then. And I was talking with a client yesterday, and my clients are, they're always going through, men and women. They talk to me. They're upset. They're emotional. They're crying. Across the board. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. If you're facing something at work and you feel like they've just destroyed your career, or that you're so underappreciated and they just have pulled the rug out from underneath you. I mean, I was talking to a guy the other day, he's a 30+ year firefighter, and he was kind of ready to move on, but the way that they're forcing him out, like, he was bringing tears to his eyes, because it's so disappointing and hurtful, and it causes depression and all the things. So anyway, it's a very long way of saying I left law enforcement to go into law school, and thankfully I'm now able to help in a way that I know people need it. And so that's how I became a lawyer.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how long was your law enforcement career?
It's about 4.5 years. Police academy, of course, and then went right into the sheriff's office, about a year in patrol, and then switched into undercover narcotics and did that for pretty much the remainder. I think I got in the narcotics unit around like in November, and then I think they put me on SWAT around January, that following January, and they both overlapped the whole time, because my agency wasn't big enough to have a full-time team. We're what you call they're called a call-out team. But I loved it, and we trained all the time. I freaking loved it. Trained all the time, and we even trained we've competed in a SWAT competition in Florida. It's called SWAT Roundup International, and I was like, that was like my heyday. I got to train all the time. Either I was training, or we were shooting, or we were obstacle course training. I mean, it was just like the closest I could ever get to being like a professional athlete. Um, Although a cheap one, because I was getting paid very little at the sheriff's office. But it was awesome. Um, but then it came crumbling down.
Yeah, that makes me think of the tactical games. You ever looked into doing the tactical games?
In
You
my
ever
younger
even?
years, before I had 3 kids to raise, yes, I certainly thought about all the things. Being on Survivor, like, should have been on Survivor back when I was on SWAT and I didn't have kids and I wasn't married and had all the time in the world. But alas, I love my life. I don't have
Yeah.
time for that. Yeah.
I love that. So, okay, so that's cool. That's interesting that you said it was 4.5 years.
Hmm.
I made it through, I guess, 5 or 6 years in law enforcement together, but the
Hmm.
agency I had issues with was 3.5 years. So it's like right
Hmm.
at that about that same timeline.
Hmm.
So talk through, I guess, a little bit. I mean, you can go into as much detail as you want, or as little, about kind of what are the main things that you experienced that somewhat pushed you out of law enforcement or made you decide, like, I'm done with this, like it's time to go.
I would say it's two main factors. One is the job is the job is the job. And if I've heard somebody one time, I was listening to a podcast. There's a couple girls talking, and as a female, I thought, oh, this is like a podcast of women in law enforcement doing this for women. And I was listening to it, and I think one of them was in law. I can't remember. But I remember one of them saying, oh, is the job hard, or how, is it getting to you? And the girl said, I don't really think it's hard at all. And immediately I thought, well, how long have you been in this job? And then she said, well, I've been in it about a year. And I was like, okay, because you stay in the job long enough, it's going to get to you somehow mentally. And I started to have a problem with balancing needing to expect everyone might want to kill me at any instant. Like, you never know, a traffic stop or domestic violence, or any encounter, and you have to be prepared. You don't know these people. You don't know if they, you just have no idea. That hypervigilant state of just always having to be prepared to keep yourself alive and protect others around you. And what I felt at the time was, you just have to kind of assume the worst in everyone so that you could go home at night and keep your community safe. um, I don't like living that way. I didn't know how to balance wanting to have positivity not being completely cynical, and yet also still knowing I needed to be able to, you have to keep yourself safe. You have to follow the rules. You can't assume somebody's telling you, you can't, they're not always telling you the truth. Um, Somebody snuck in some drugs inside her body cavity into the jail one time, and then they wanted to, and supposedly I was in trouble for that, for not checking her body cavity. And I was like, look, there's only so many ways I'm going to check a chick out before she gets to the jail. And sorry, but that's what they do in the jail. That's not what I do. I mean, so anyway, that's a kind of a weird example, but it's just one of them. I was like, wait a second, I'm not getting in trouble for not searching in her hoo-ha. That's not my job. I patted her down. I took the knives out of her bra. I mean, come on. So, and I remember specifically telling my captain towards the end, I said, not only am I dealing with, and I'll get to the second part, the problems I'm having at work, but I said to that, I don't know how you balance this, and I want to, and this is 20 something years ago, and I think sometimes we offer too much lip service to wellness now, but at least there is lip service to it. At least people are talking about it, and people are like that. It's proactive, active, daily, regular activities that are required to counteract that hypervigilant state, and that needing to assume everyone and wanting to kill you all the time. The second part is that I certainly faced harassment, discrimination in my job in narcotics and SWAT team. And what I mean by that is, were they telling me blatantly, you suck because you're a female? And this is what I try and educate people on all the time. It doesn't have to be blatant, explicit, we hate you because you're a girl. It's not that. It's that you look around and you think, well, why am I the only one that's in trouble all the time? Why am I the one, like, sure, I make mistakes. And it took, I'm sure there's so many people out there listening that have experienced this is, yes, I've made a mistake, I'll do better. Yes, I made a mistake, I'll do better. Yes, I made a mistake, I'll do better. Then finally you're like, well, hold on a second. And those guys are making mistakes. And not that I'm picking on guys, just for my scenario, it was specifically like, well, he's making a mistake and he's not getting 500 mountain climbers. He's making a mistake and he's not getting a letter in his file. He's making a mistake and he's not getting an extra 30 days of probation. I started like, well, what the heck? And then it just literally got to the point where I was like, I literally would say, if you could just leave me alone for a day, just leave me alone for a day and let me do my job without getting on me about something. And throwing all these things together, I just realized that, towards the end, I'm like, nothing I do is going to matter. Nothing I do is going to I'm never going to be able to prove to them that I'm a good SWAT operator, that I'm a good narcotics investigator, that my gender doesn't matter. And that I can actually bring something to the table that you don't have, not because there's something wrong with you, just, apples and oranges, Mars, Venus. And so I'm just not the type of person that's going to be like, come in and clock out, clock in and clock out and go home. I'm just a proactive, go-getter, want to make a difference person. And so ultimately I was like, you know what, screw you. I don't have to do this for the rest of my life. And I could see that even if I went federal, it was going to be the same things. And no offense to anybody that would be in federal law enforcement that's listening out there. I just figured it was going to be like maybe slightly bigger egos, but fighting the same battles. And so I was like, I'll just go do something else. And that was not an easy decision. I was crushed, really crushed. It took me years to get over it. I was really bitter about it. The biggest regret that I have in any of it is that even when I was given an explicit opportunity from my captain, who was on my side, he could see what was happening, mostly because he was seeing all the letters of reprimand coming across his desk for me. And he would say, I called me and he's like, is there anything you want to tell me that you want to talk about? And I said, nope, because I just wanted to be remembered as somebody who did my job and not somebody that complained. And in hindsight, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. They may or may not change their opinion of you, but what I told people all the time, I tell my clients, is you have to do what's right by you. And you have to tell them what's happening. My captain was not going to take action on my behalf if I was not complaining about it. And I could have said, yes, Captain, here's all the ways that I'm being singled out, that other people around me are not being treated I'm getting disparate treatment. And that's what I talk to people about all the time. If you're being treated differently than someone, is it because you're female, you're Black, you're gay, you're Jewish, you're injured, you're young. I mean, I actually have a client who I believe she was fired partly for age discrimination, but because she was too young by a female. So a female discriminating against a female, which really makes me mad. And but it's not, I mean, so there's lots of different ways it can happen, but ultimately it was that, again, I'm a firm believer that, it's never too late. Life's too short to put up with things that are unjust. Like, do something about it. And for me, that meant leaving and doing something else. But I think for a lot of people out there, it doesn't mean you have to leave, but figure out what your options are and do something about it. And I know there's a lot of, me too, I felt cynical about it at the time. People think, well, it won't make a difference. Like, what's the point? I'll complain and then they won't care. Maybe, but how do you know that if you don't report them? And I've had lots of conversation with chiefs since I've started my business, and I go out and talk to different podcasts and different podcasts, and some of those podcasts are former chiefs, and they all say, it breaks my heart to hear that, because when you have somebody that's dedicated to the job and is good for the job, and to know that they never reported it, they say, like, I never even, you never even would have given me the chance to fix it. And that's my biggest regret out of all of it, is not reporting it, because would it have fixed things? I don't know. Would it have made things more difficult for me? Probably. But could it have made things better? Maybe. And then sadly, the thing that I kick myself in the butt about the most is they think everything they did was okay, so that any female that came behind me, they could just keep doing that. Because nobody ever said, no, 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 you're not doing this right. Let me just give you some tips. Let me redirect you a little bit. So it was, like I said, I mean, it was really hard. The other reason I think my biggest mistake in not reporting it is that it meant that I held on to that for 13 years longer than I should have. And it took me 13 years for me to even realize that I was holding on to it in a way that I needed to let go of. So there's so many reasons that my advice to anybody out there is, if you're experiencing this, do something about it. And not just because it's wrong and it should be fixed, but for your mental health. I consider what I do to be a mental health tool, in the same way that I think what you do for people from a physical perspective is a mental health tool, because obviously being physically fit helps your body and mind function at peak level. But also, if you're dealing with a legal problem, all my clients, it is an all-consuming problem. It's all you think about, it's all you talk about, it's what you dream about, and it affects your husband or wife, it affects your kids. Like, everybody around you knows it, and that's not healthy. And it's, my clients are depressed, and I mean, some of them feel like they're almost bipolar, and they're crying regularly, and there's nothing wrong with crying, but don't live with it. Do something about it. And like, my clients, I just regularly, one of them called me today, oh, Bridget, I'm sorry I have to call you and ask you this. Like, would you stop it? I'm your lawyer, and that's what I'm here for. Mostly because 80% of the time I'm telling you, no, you're not crazy. No, you didn't make this up. No, there's nothing wrong with you. So I'm here to tell everybody that there's nothing wrong with you. You're doing the right things. Nobody's perfect. Nobody around you is perfect. So do something about it.
Yeah. There's so many points in there that resonate with me and my experience,
Mm-hmm.
and I can like feel it in my chest already, because it's like the triggers are coming back, right?
Yes, me
Um,
too.
gosh. Um, so what would you, so in relating this to me, I think, like, when I came on the department, it was very much, and this was with everybody, it was like the mentality of don't speak unless spoken to,
Mm-hmm.
bullshit, if I'm being honest, as you come in as a
Mm-hmm.
rookie, because my mentality was, I feel like I have something to give here. Like, I know my value. I feel like I can contribute, but you're telling me to sit down and shut the fuck up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that, like, first thing to me was like, we're button heads already, because like
Mm-hmm.
I want to be of value to you, and you're basically telling me I'm worthless.
Yep.
So this is like disconnect one of like, why am I here? Um, and then you get out of field training, you get onto the street, and then it was a similar thing to me, of me feeling like I was always under a microscope, that I could never do anything right.
Mm-hmm.
And I had come into that position with several years of experience before I even got there. So I was like, I know how to be a cop. Like, where's the disconnect here? Like, you guys are telling
Mm-hmm.
me, well, why did she do that? Or she should have done this, or whatever. It's just like the chitter chatter that
Mm-hmm.
everybody's criticizing. And then it's to the point of questioning myself of like, did I actually know what I was doing? Like,
Yeah.
it gets in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say, like, I think part of it too, I mean, you come in as a female officer, or maybe it's just as a rookie, it could apply to guys too. Um, if you're in somewhere that's like don't speak unless spoken to, or like basically it's learned that you don't have a voice until you've got about 5 years on the department type of thing. What's your advice to those people that are somewhat silenced, that are like afraid to speak up because it's like the department culture of like, don't, that was the thing, is like they told us like don't ruffle feathers, don't put a target on your back. So it was like towing the line of like, when do I stand up for myself? How is the right way to go about standing up for myself so that I don't put a target on my back? And just, I guess, what would be your piece of advice for that type of thing?
Well, I will definitely say there's no easy way to do it. But what I also say all the time is you can handle this. You chose a job that's not easy. There's nothing about being in law enforcement that is easy. And so you are strong enough for this. You are brave enough for this. And like in my situation, when I finally had kind of got fed up and, like I said, I was like you, just constantly, everything I did was under the microscope. I was always under a spotlight. Nobody else was. And finally, something happened. One of my sergeant on narcotics unit, who was also one of the team captains on SWAT, we'd done some SWAT training, and I saw that he made a mistake where if I had done that same thing, it would have just been, I mean, screaming from the rafters. And so I literally, it's when I just like, this is it. And so I went to our SWAT commander, didn't say who it was, tried to give as little specifics as possible, just to say, look, if I would have done this, like I literally said, I'm not asking for better treatment. I'm just asking for equal treatment. So I kind of sort of gave the example without, because I wasn't trying to rat on anybody. And his response to me was, don't make a problem for yourself where there's not one. And I was like, well, but I'm kind of telling you that there already is one. And I'm just asking if we could make it not be one. And he repeated it like 3 times. Don't make a problem for yourself where there's not one. So it's very similar where they say, don't ruffle feathers. Don't put a target on your back. Okay, but I already have a target on my back. And so the proper way to do that is okay, again, this is not going to be easy. And if you need help assessing this, I offer free 15-minute calls. Even if I don't become your attorney, I'll give you a free 15-minute cheering session to say, you must do this, and it's not going to be easy, but do it. Because then if you do it, so look at your policies and see, what does it say about reporting unfair treatment, whether it's harassment, discriminatory, retaliation, hostile work environment. You can look up the definition of hostile work environment. That one is more of sort of an ongoing thing. It's not like, oh, this incident happened on this day and this, I'm so offended. I mean, I have a client whose chief asked her more than once if she was still intimate with her husband. And that's obviously a very explicit, specific example that we can point to. But my example or your example is probably also does include, and for a lot of people, is the hostile work environment, just a very consistent, ongoing level of treatment that ends up forcing you out. Even if you leave, it's really, whether they'll ever, nobody will ever testify to say, oh yeah, we were doing this to try and make her quit. But really it's, for whatever reason they don't want you there, you're being treated differently than somebody else. So it's disparate treatment and ultimately pushing you to the point of, well, I quit. If you file a complaint like that later, they'll say, well, she quit. And you're like, actually, it's called a de facto termination, because you pushed her to the point of that it was just, she couldn't bear it anymore. So it is, find out how you're supposed to report this. If it's your direct supervisor, you're allowed to jump the chain. They can't ever come back to you and say, well, you're supposed to report it to your supervisor first. Okay, but my supervisor's the problem. No, you can jump the chain. Find out if there's a formal reporting procedure. Almost all generic, scrappy manuals have something in there about a formal reporting procedure, even though they don't really have a form. And what that means is put it in writing, email it, go to the HR department. And because you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to jump the chain of command and go straight to your HR department if it's harassment, discrimination. Look at your manual. It's going to say that. If it doesn't, call me, because then we have a bigger problem with your department. Take that first step to put them on notice. Just because you notify the HR department does not, in a lot of cases that I've heard of, is that the HR department doesn't even notify anybody. It's outrageous. They should, because that puts them, it triggers, it's supposed to trigger automatic action on their part. A lot of times it doesn't. So my advice is, first, make sure you're keeping a detailed timeline of events, dates, times, people. I always ask this first step I get from any client is I need a timeline of events in your own words with date, times, and people of what happened. Were you demoted and transferred to the night shift? Was there someone else that they could have put in your place? Who was that? Who's the name? Like normally the more, the less senior people get like one of my clients, they transferred her to the night shift saying that they needed people, but she had a more senior status and a special position on the day shift. They could have transferred somebody with less experience that didn't have the senior title, that didn't have also the extra duty. She was like also a mental health officer, which is what our communities want now. Our communities want mental health officers. They transferred her night. She couldn't be mental health officer anymore. They removed her senior officer title because she couldn't be there on night shift. When there was, so I need the specifics, like, well, who, I need the names of the people who they could have transferred. So that's the thing is, well, they did this, but they didn't do it to him. They did this to me, but they didn't do it to him. Make that list. But also it just starts with putting it in writing and sending it to HR saying, I need to make you aware this is what's happening. Also, if it's to that point, of course, I think you should consult someone like me because there are specific words and phrases you need to use that trigger federal protections that once you give that your department, whether they take action or not, they're supposed to. And that's really important later if you're going to try and, if they retaliate against you, if they, for whatever reason, end up firing you anyway. I mean, that's one of my clients. She called me. They were investigating her for internal affairs for something for complete crap. They fired her a week later. So, I mean, we didn't even have time to start complaining before they fired her. But she had already put, so we were like very quickly, I was like, you need to tell your sergeant this right away. And so she got that on the record of putting them on notice that she was being treated this way because she was female. And that's really important in the process. So my advice is make sure you have a timeline and put it in writing and put somebody on notice. That's very important. Because sometimes they'll even ask you, what do you want to do about it? And you could say, I don't know yet. You could even blatantly say, I don't know yet. It scares me to even report this, but I need somebody to know. And you can even put that in your statement. That's important because it's always true. It's always true that you're afraid to report it. Put it in your statement. Put it in the email you're sending to HR. I'm afraid to report this to you because I'm afraid of retaliation, but I needed to know this is what's happening.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that was something that was told to me that I wish I would have done that I hadn't done. And one of which I got so angry with somebody that I deleted the text message thread and I wish I never had.
Yeah. Oh,
'Cause
don't
I
delete.
needed those back.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Don't delete any text message. If anything, take a screenshot of it, save it in your files, but delete the text if you want, but save a screenshot of it somewhere. I get it. You get people, you're so mad, you're like, screw you, I'm blocking you from my phone, I'm deleting you from my life forever. But in those situations, I always ask for client. I want text messages, voicemails, letters, emails, a copy of your employee policy. What do they say you're supposed to do about this? The other thing I want people to know is it doesn't matter. This happens all the time. Well, we looked into it, and then the guy said that's not what he meant to do. HR will say, well, we asked the offender about it, and he said that's not what he meant. So there's no violation. We're closing this. Their intention is not the standard. If you read your employee policy manual, it more than likely says something along the lines of, it's the perception of the receiver. Perception. That's it. So the chief who asked my client about whether or not she was intimate with her husband, he perceived that as being awful in so many ways. He said, well, that's not what I meant by that. But you know what? That doesn't matter. You're an idiot. And he recorded it. Thank you so much for recording the conversation. So we have it. It's recorded. That's where I tell people too, you start to second yourself all the time. I know it. I did it too. You did it too. Oh my gosh, is it me? Maybe I'm so stupid. Maybe I'm not good enough for this job. They're right. I suck. I should quit. I'm a bad cop. I'm a bad firefighter. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get people killed. No. If you are to that point, you should call me because you've already been putting up for this with this for way too long. And we need to start looking at what you can do. And honestly, some of this is life's never too short. There's not a single agency in this country that's fully staffed. Look at lateraling out. That is another thing I tell people all the time. I've talked about it with so many other people, but you're not stuck where you are. Like, and for my situation, did I want to leave SWAT team? No. That was one of the coolest, most proudest things I have ever done. And if I had gone to another department, I don't know if I could have gotten on SWAT team. That was literally right place, right time, timing for me. Two people left. I tried out. I made it. There wouldn't, I don't know when the next position would have gotten open, or maybe the next department just never lets anybody on if they don't have 5, 8, 10 years of experience. I had 1 year of experience when they put me on SWAT team. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good idea either, but I did it. You could not have told me any different when I was 25 years old. I don't know how old I was, 25. Let's just say 25 sounds good. 25, 26. And maybe I would have had to ladder out. Maybe, but I could have gotten there again. I mean, life is, I say life is too short to put up with it, but at the same time, it can happen again. Like the crap only lasts for so long. And you come out of it, you'll come out of it on the other side. So it's a lot. I know I just said a lot, and I always go on. It's just, I get, obviously this is really important to me. I'm so passionate about it because I lived it. I know it. I know how awful it is. And you do have options. It's just sometimes you need an outside perspective, like working with somebody like you or working with somebody like me to say, no, this is not right. And here's why. And here's what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but
Mm-hmm.
it's cool that you recognize it was one of the hardest decisions you felt like you ever had to make, because I feel the same way about mine. Like I was terrified to leave, but at the same time, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, how much do I let this degrade like my mental and physical health? Because I see myself down in the rabbit hole, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
see it getting any better. Because I remember one night, like I woke up and just started bawling, and like my now husband just like sat there and like hugged me because he didn't know what to do, because I was like, why do I feel like I'm the worst person on this earth? Like
Right.
why,
Mm-hmm.
like it was just like that was like my rock bottom moment of like, I have to get
Yeah.
out. Like this is not worth crying in the middle of the night over and feeling absolutely miserable.
Same. When I
Yeah.
found after I reported that guy made the mistake, and my SWAT commander ended up going to the whole team saying that I was trying to rat out one of my own teammates, and then I found out my whole team was calling me a rat behind my back. And I found that out at a party one night because we had because I was in the narcotics unit, we worked closely with the DAs to get our search warrants and everything, and we had two or three of us had gotten invited to this party, and one of my SWAT guys was there, and he told me about it. And I had literally like left the party right then, got in my car to drive home, and I had to pull over because I was crying so hard I couldn't drive. I was so crushed. I couldn't believe my own SWAT commander had turned it into that, and that my team was calling me a rat. And oh, by the way, that happened when we were on our way to execute a search warrant that I wrote myself, got approved by the judge myself, and had conducted all the undercover buys myself, buying, I don't remember if it was crack or cocaine, with a guy who had a rifle sitting right next to him in his chair. So, all the ways that I'd put my life on the line. And when the SWAT team was on their way to execute my search warrant for my undercover buys, they were calling me a rat. I was crushed. And it freaking happens. And it sucks. And there is something you can do about it. And there are changes that you can make. And there are a lot of people across the country who want to help you figure this out. I mean, whether it's you with with the fitness and health and wellness that you do, whether it's me with the legal, I know people who also help law enforcement officers transition out. I'm sure you talk to people about that all the time. There are people who specifically help law enforcement officers with resumes to help them recognize, like, you think, oh, but I don't have any value, I'm just a cop. Bullshit. Let somebody look at this through a different lens, and they're going to say, oh, you did this assignment, well then this is all the ways we can describe you. Like, oh wow, yes, you are a badass. You are a badass, and you have value to a lot of people in a lot of different ways, whether that it's your department or another department, or whether it's as a cop or whether it's not as a cop. And I know that if you're a cop, yes, and you and I both know it's really hard to leave that job. And doesn't mean you have to, but there's a lot of great things that can happen to you because you are more than the job. No matter what you think, you are more than just a cop or a firefighter or an EMT or whatever.
Absolutely. So, trying to wrap this up a little bit,
Yeah.
I know your entire life and what you're doing now is such a positive outcome that it's like the turning the pain into passion type of thing, and I've kind of walked that journey also. What
Mhm.
are some positive outcomes that you've seen from some of the people that you've helped through some of these things?
Well, one is a client that's on the Bridget Giglio list, and I give him a plan. It's like what I do is I offer it's like we come up with or I create like a 6-month plan that to follow for proactive either weekly, monthly activities, contacting a lot of different people in a very tactical and proactive way. And his is shifting, that he's getting a response from the DA's office to, here's our plan for be able to get you off, getting it in front of the right people, but in the right way, without saying like, just that you're not going up to somebody all the time just crying, wah, wah. Is that you want, and I say it's that you're poking the bear, but without getting mauled. And so, I help people do that, and that's working. That I have clients who like this, very like say, the most important thing I do for people, clients that I have, again, young women, men who have 15 years in, another client who has 15 years in, that we're moving, we're taking action that they tell me all the time, without you, I don't know how I could have gotten through this, because it is so consuming. It alters your life so significantly. And they're taking action where they're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They're starting to feel better. Their spouses are telling me, Bridget, thank you so much. It's the first time in a long time I've been able to see that he or she is feeling better, starting to smile again. And all the outcomes are different. Whether, because you can do mediation, sometimes it's lawsuit. It doesn't always go to lawsuit, but lawsuits end up taking longer. It's that they all tell me, basically what they're telling me is they feel like they're taking the control back. That are they in a situation that they wish that they wanted to be in? No, but they feel like they're now in control, and that they all know I'm available, and that I help talk them off that ledge, so to speak, of when they're questioning themselves or want to quit and they don't want to follow through. So, the success for me is that I know that I'm helping them feel happier each day. And even if it's not the perfect outcome, is no, you're not going to be able to get your chief fired every time. No, you're not going to get a $750,000 settlement every time, but you're going to get something. And what the most important thing you're going to get is knowing that you did something to start to take control of what otherwise felt like an out of control, overwhelming, and all-consuming problem.
Yeah, I love that. I talk to my clients a lot about that of trying to figure out what's within your control versus what's not
Yeah,
within your control and how to
yeah,
respond based on what
hmm
those things are. So that's awesome
yeah,
because I think a lot of women especially feel like they're like ball and chain to their job, whether it's like working ridiculous shifts or just like literally not having a life outside of work.
hmm
That's a huge thing of taking your control back, and whether
Well,
it's something
and I,
toxic or it's just overtime and all that other crap that's running your
yeah,
life.
and I'm sure you tell your clients this too. But I mean, I was just as guilty of it as the next cop. But making your job your whole life as a cop is one of the worst possible things you can do for yourself. I know it's exciting at first, and you want to be part of the team, and you want to be, especially for women, like if you don't, you want to be included. Do not make this job your whole life. It will, I promise it will bite you in the ass, because it's going to end up being hard at some point. And if it's the only thing you do and think about and all the time, then that's going to definitely feel like your life is falling apart around you, versus making sure that you keep pieces of your life that have nothing to do with law enforcement. Then yes, it's still going to be a bad situation, but then you still have other things that are not falling apart around you. And I know you talk about that with people too. Um, and also just balancing out. I mean, the job of law enforcement is a very powerful position. There are not very many other jobs on this planet that give you the much power and authority that a law enforcement officer has, where you can legally take the life of another if need be. And it's really important that you balance that out with the real world. So it can lead you down into a bad place. Oh, I also wanted to
Absolutely.
say another example, which I think this is very important for anybody out, law enforcement or first responders, is another common discrimination problem that I deal with is officers get injured and the way that they're treated afterwards. Um, they cannot discriminate against you based upon an injury or if you filed a workers' comp claim. And there's a lot of different ways that manifests itself. But I just got a new client this week where they're pushing him out and treating him differently after he was injured on the job training. And they have to be real careful how they do that. They can eventually let you go, even if you were injured on the job. But they got to be real careful how they do it. And it's real easy for them to mess up and not do it the right way. So that's another one. Or women who are pregnant and all of a sudden their agency says, well, you have to take unpaid leave while you're pregnant. Like, you should definitely call me if that's what they're telling you. That one really chaps my hide when that happens, because that's bullshit. But yeah, so lots of different ways that these issues come up, but cops need to take care of themselves. If you get injured on the job, please make a workers' comp claim. And, like I said, I offer free 15-minute calls. Even if I give you, obviously I can't give you a lot of legal advice, but, sometimes I'm like, well, it sounds like you need to do something, keep this in mind. Not everybody needs me yet, but happy to help if I can.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're a resource, even just to bounce some ideas off on, just to get like a loose
Mhm.
plan or some advice of what they should do. So where do we find you?
My website is the best place, ladylawshield.com. That's where you go to book a call with me. Like I said, definitely, get on my newsletter list, because I send out lots of different tips on legal things. Or I think, obviously everything I do is from a wellness standpoint. And so, I try and wrap that in a lot. And so it's not just boring case law decisions, because you can find that lots of places. But that's not, yes, I'm a lawyer, so I have to know case law, but that's not what you need to know. Like, you don't need to know how the sausage is made. But sign up for my newsletter list. I give lots of freebies, like give you an idea of, what does an EEOC claim look like? What does a workers' comp claim look like? What is Brady Giglio, and what is the approach that I take for helping with Brady Giglio? So those are all freebies that I offer if you sign up for the newsletter. And then just, almost so my social media links are on there, but just go to my website. It's all there.
Cool. I love that. Well, thank you so much for spending your time here with us. And I hope someone out there hears this and decides to take you up on some advice and makes the decision to take the control back in their life.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you for today. This was great.
Absolutely.